Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In rising to speak on the third reading of the Employment Relations Film Production Work Amendment Bill, I'd like to start by actually acknowledging the Honourable Jerry Brownlee for what he said, because actually finally somebody over that side of the House has actually said what is true and what is evidenced by the facts, and that is that of course the people on this side of the House support the New Zealand film industry. Of course Labor supports The Hobbit being made in New Zealand, and in fact we have a very proud record of supporting the New Zealand film industry, and I challenge anybody to disprove that. So I want to thank the Honourable Jerry Brownlee for making that statement and putting it on the record. And in fact I would go as far as saying there is not a single person in this House from any party that does not want to see The Hobbit made here. Of course we do. It is important for our country. When I started my contributions in the first reading, I said I was going to ask a number of questions, and I've done that through a number of speeches now, and I still think that there are many unanswered questions. I think, unfortunately, the debate has largely, in terms of the government benches, been a number of key points which go somewhat like this. Prime Minister did a great job, saved the day. The union movement was destroying The Hobbit and setting out to destroy The Hobbit, and Labor didn't want to see The Hobbit made here. And I've dealt with a third of those, and I say thank you to Jerry Brownlee for recognising that bit wasn't true. Very few substantive contributions from that side of the House on the actual issues. I think there still are a number of unanswered questions. I think the question of what role foreign corporates can have in dealing with a domestic matter and raising and seeking changes to domestic legislation like labour laws is still deeply troubling, and I've had no assurances from the Minister of Labour about where she sees any boundaries around that, what matters are and are not on the table for foreign corporates to raise in terms of New Zealand labour law, and I would still like to see her answer that question. I think there's been a whole number of questions about how this dispute was handled, and I have put on record my concern that in terms of labour issues, this is a government that seems to have no ability to intervene in any constructive way when there are problems. The Minister of Labour was completely absent from this whole process, and if it comes down in the end to this is the solution, both giving some more tax incentives, well that's not her responsibility, that's Jerry Brownlee's, and secondly, dealing with a matter of employment law, which is her responsibility, why was she absent from the whole process? So I think that question remains unanswered, and it's not the only time that the Minister of Labour has been missing in action. This dispute has been mishandled, and I think we've seen, even in the debate here, contradictory points of view being made by government members. You know, we have had Minister Joyce saying Warner Brothers wanted this, they required this change. We've had Jerry Brownlee very articulately say, no, nothing to do with Warner Brothers, it's us, we see the need to clarify this point of view. They both can't be true, as others have said. So over the last couple of weeks we've seen all sorts of people jumping in and making different sorts of statements. This dispute has not been handled well, and in fact what I find particularly unpleasant is that what has happened is that there's been a real desire to use it as an opportunity to say it is all the union movement's fault. Now look, I don't think everything was handled perfectly, so I put that on record, but I think that those that are saying this is all down to actions of actors and other people working in the film industry and their union is wrong. The vilification of Helen Kelly and the Council of Trade Unions has been absolutely unpleasant and uncalled for, and I again note that Jerry Brownlee has taken a slightly different tack on that one, and I'm glad that is also on the record, because I think some of that has been most uncalled for. This is our central trade union body, and any government that really wants to see a country succeed actually has to be able to engage with employers, has to be able to engage with unions as representatives of working people in New Zealand, and has to be able to engage properly with the community. And to say that one part of that, the union movement, are outside of any ability to speak on behalf of the people who work in an industry, to say that they are wrong to try and improve their wages and conditions, I think is quite despicable. So I think all of those elements of this dispute have been poorly handled. Now, the bill that is before us, and I'm sure my colleague Charles Chauvel will be saying some more on this, he's already very helpfully pointed out some concerns, but I do think this raises again an issue of competence. We have a bill before us that, firstly, we don't believe is actually necessary, that there is settled law in the matter of whether people are contractors or employees, that the actual issue of dispute wasn't around that issue. It was around a concern that people were trying to collectively, and again Jerry Brownlee did reflect this, collectively as independent contractors, deal with improving their conditions of employment. Now, this may not be as easy as employees dealing with collective matters, because they do have the right to collectively bargain for collective employment agreements, but it is not impossible. And around the world there are examples of both in the film industry and other industries of people who are independent contractors working collectively to try and set some standards around how they will work and the nature of the conditions that they face. So I don't think that the competition laws rule that out at all. I think yesterday we had an example of the Irish film industry where they're grappling with this very issue. This is the actual issue, and I think a much more constructive response would be to look at getting on and improving industry standards, and that was the agreement that was reached, that the Pink Book, which has set industry standards, would be renegotiated, and it would be done in a collective manner to set some standards. That is not anti-competitive. So this bill arguably is not necessary, but also it is of concern for two other reasons. One, because the film industry does have a number of independent contractors operating, has always had. And the law, as I've said, is quite settled in the matter. But there are other people in that industry who are not independent contractors, who are not well paid, and who are employees. What this bill does is says, as a default mechanism, people will be seen as independent contractors. What are the implications for those people? And what are the wider implications if this government seeks to expand this amendment to the Employment Relations Act to other industries? And we do not think that that is too far-fetched to be considering. This is a government that has shown that it is backward-looking in terms of employment law, that wants to go back to less rights, looks back fondly on the Employment Contracts Act, and so we are worried about the implications. But also, we are not confident that this bill will actually do what it sets out to achieve, and in fact could potentially cause a great deal more problem than it sets out. And one of the things I want to particularly highlight is the use of urgency which denies scrutiny of legislation, which means that the public, that experts, that members of this House can scrutinise properly legislation to make sure that it doesn't have any unintended consequences, that we are all fully aware of what it means and what it may or may not do. I think that is shocking to force it through. It makes no difference in practical terms to have this passed this week. So again, I just think that, for the record, this is a government that is overusing urgency, is overusing 42nd bill under urgency, no scrutiny by select committees. That is shocking. But finally, I want to conclude by talking about there is a better way of dealing with these matters. And this is where I feel very concerned that we have a Minister of Economic Development and a Minister of Labour who don't seem to take responsibility for looking at what the real issues are here. And I want to get on record the fact that the issue of the Hobbit and whether it would or would not proceed is not related to just recent matters. Last year in December, the Dominion Post had an article saying Jackson calls for incentives to keep the New Zealand industry alive. It was known by Jerry Brownlee that there were concerns about the level of incentive and the need for more money to support the film industry. That was December 2009. In July 2010, a Dominion Post headline again, movie jobs head north as Hobbit delays continue. Filmmaker Sir Peter Jackson can't guarantee the Hobbit will ever be made as concerns grow that a lack of jobs is causing movie industry workers to leave Wellington. Which takes me to Kate Wilkinson. Looking at productive employment relationships, looking at better conditions of work, looking at higher wages, looking at situations where workers can get together collectively and have their voice recognised, a part of a